morning all, and thank you for joining us for the webinar on Niche Recruitment, Effective Measurement of Domain-Specific Niche Skills Finance Edition. I'm Purva from People Matters and would take you through the agenda for today's webinar. Recruiting for domain-specific niche skills, in this case, measuring an individual's efficacy towards finance control, budget and resource allocation, and reducing cost to maximize working capital for business growth can be very challenging. This webinar will talk about finance hiring best practices, finance talent discovery and sourcing, finance talent measuring skill fit with the job recruitment effectively, optimize the finance experts panel time and bandwidth, measuring knowledge versus hands-on skills. We have the privilege of having with us Sanjay Kumar, Vice President and Head HR, Fino Paytech Limited. Sanjay is responsible for the organizational strategic plan of supporting the design and execution of business unit strategies through the development and implementation of HR strategies and solutions that support short and long-term business objectives. He has a vast experience of over 22 years. Prior to joining Fino Paytech, Sanjay has been associated with brands like Reliance Group, EXL, Bharti Airtel, Convergys India, HCL, and ISPAT Group. Our partners for today's webinar for helping us make this program possible is Metal, which is an online assessment and testing platform to measure, analyze, and improve people skills. It is ideal for companies who want to run multi-competency assessments for their prospective hires or existing employees. Metal focuses deeply on the science of assessment and combine it with advanced technology to deliver highly valid and reliable tests. We have saved time for you to ask your questions at the end of the webinar. For those watching the live webinar, you can submit questions at any time during the presentation through the question and answer section. We will try to respond to as many questions as time allows. We have a full exciting agenda for the webinar today, so without any further delay, I'm going to hand over the webinar microphone to Sanjay. Over to you, Sanjay.
Thank you, Purva. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I am happy to share with you my thoughts and points of view on effective measurement of domain-specific niche skills. For today, we will be focusing on finance. To begin with, I'll be starting with general recruitment, and then I shall be moving on to specific finance function hiring. I would like to spend some time on general recruitment skills as well and the nuances which are involved in that, because it is important and it also is highly relevant to finance hiring. So let me begin with the first slide, which is I'll just share with you the contents, a table of contents, so that we know what is the structure of the presentation, so we have a quick understanding. So we'll begin with some thoughts on measurement of skills. We'll move on to discovery and sourcing. After that, we'll talk about hiring a finance professional. This is where it will start confining itself to the specialized domain of finance. Then we'll talk about measuring knowledge versus hand-on skills. And finally, of course, we'll move on to the benefits of measurement. So let me start with a little open-ended kind of a discussion on the topic. I have chosen the word measurement of skills for this. Is it possible? Maybe not accurately. The reason is that human beings do not come. In my next slide, I will show you, is, of course, an approximation is highly desirable to measure everything. However, human behavior is a subjective phenomenon. Secondly, human beings come as a package, and they do not come as a, just an array of skills which you can buy. So human beings are more than the skills that they deliver, and the expert knowledge or the soft skills or the management skills they offer. They come along with their strengths, weaknesses, attitude, predilection, biases, and their ideology, their worldview. It all comes as a package, and you have to understand and deal with that person in a team, especially, it becomes a complex exercise. So with that, I would say the fact of the matter is that measuring is highly desirable, but it's very difficult. Nevertheless, the attempt should be there. HR professionals and the recruiters have a strong understanding of human behavior, as they are the specialists and practitioners of behavioral sciences. However, over a period of time, we have all seen that for some reason, maybe because of the delay in earning a seat on the board table, or because of delay in earning a seat on final financial decision-making table, the profession, which includes me, we developed a kind of a complex. For want of a better expression, I'd put it there. So the HR professionals are gripped by an existentialist angst. They started aping the finance and marketing professionals and the business leaders. And in that, they started trying to quantify everything, whereas this approach is good and desirable. And it does, however, it does have limitations. We should, at the same time, we should remember that the specific ability of the HR professional, which differentiates them from the rest of the corporate community, is dependent on the fact that they have much more well-rehearsed and much deeper insights. This is based on objective as well as subjective understanding of people during interviews. This intuitive understanding is equally or more important. Nevertheless, coming back to the topic, as on finance and hiring finance professionals, when we are trying to aid the approach of numbers and quantification, putting a number to everything, most of us in HR started using models, matrices, some other ways of measurement. However, some part of it we must remember of this is always subjective. Let me give you an analogy. The hard sciences, are amenable to measure precisely the various principles and factors that are impacting a phenomenon, be it physics, chemistry, biology, and the other sciences. However, on the other hand, the behavioral sciences are a social science. They do adopt a scientific approach. Nevertheless, it is an observational science and it has limitations there. So behavioral sciences would have, subjects like include different parts. It's an eclectic science, so it borrows from psychology, social anthropology, sociology, and behavioral economics primarily. So these subjects are social sciences and not hard sciences. They follow a scientific approach, yes. So we must remember this. As a word of caution, I thought, let me enunciate a bit on this aspect of the journey that we are going to commence now. The most important function in an organization, irrespective of any department, is to understand the requirement of the job and to hire the right person. This is something which is a given and need not be mentioned even. So I think we'll start with a general understanding of the parameters, overall parameters for any department or any specialized vocation, and then we'll move on to a specific finance function. We must always remember that the cost of a wrong recruitment is certainly has more implications and more damage it can cause, and the loss is more compared to any other aspect, organizational activity. And this is true for across levels. It is all the more important at the senior levels, to the extent that it can make or mar a company's fortunes, at least for a certain number of years, or a year, if not over a period of long time. Recruitment, selection, and induction, which I would say now, just to sound more updated, is sourcing, selection, and onboarding. These are the three dimensions of this activity, and we must always remember to make a differentiation between recruitment and selection. So then we'll talk about it as we go across the slides. So all the recruiters are the first touch point of the candidate, and they are expected to demonstrate excellent soft skills, interpersonal skills, and professionalism, a very high degree of professionalism. In addition to this, it is imperative for them to have good domain knowledge so that when they are connecting with the employee, they are entering into a meaningful discussion right at the outset and are able to gauge those parameters proficiently. Only this will enable them to save on time of the departmental recruitment managers and the HODs, head of departments, in this case, the CFO and the finance managers. This capability is required across levels. Functional expertise is required across levels. It's hygiene. Even a certain level of behavioral skills is hygiene, and a recruiter must be able to gauge both these skills astutely. Of course, the flavor of both these skills varies as we grow from a junior to a senior level, and we'll talk about it. Now, I think I would not read out the slide. These are some of the things which every recruiter, of course, tries to discern in a candidate's CV first and foremost, and then during the interview tries to validate that finding. Of course, the recruiter does corroborate that with the inputs from, say, a psychometric test whenever it has been used, or any other tools and techniques. I mean, of course, very rarely, because of the costs involved, there is an assessment center also involved for certain positions. But that's not something which is very common. So having said this, let me move on to the closure of this discussion on the general recruitment, and then so that we can move on to finance. So I would like to just share with you this standard diagram, which is extremely important. So at the junior levels, it is the functional and the technical skills, which is very important. These skills, of course, vary. So let me still, though it's a general discussion, let me start with the finance skills. For example, when we are recruiting a junior level person, or even a middle level person, the junior level, of course, is the doer, and the middle level is the supervisor of the same skill sets, I would say. So at that stage, we are looking at the strong understanding of accounting and financial principles, processes, and practices. An advanced understanding of managing and preparing and analyzing financial statements like profit and loss statement, P&L, which is the statement, the cash flow statement, the balance sheet. It also involves providing management with accurate financial information, management accounts, and data analysis, and of course, compliance of all accounting standards. Now, these are the skills which one would monitor that the doer at the junior level is well versed with, and the supervisor can handle a team, since the supervisor already has undergone this journey and has a high level of proficiency and can review, guide, and coach the team and ensure that this job is done. So, however, as we move up the ladder, for example, a CFO, Chief Financial Officer. So at that level, it is the conceptualizing skills which are more important, and this must be gauged at the recruiter's level only. Of course, the level of the recruiter also varies. If it is a CFO, I'm sure a very senior HR recruiter would be involved. If it is a manager, a mid-level, or if it is an executive, there will be a junior level person. So what is important at the senior levels is not merely the technical or functional skills. So in finance, of course, I'll call it functional skills. They're not technical skills in that sense. So the functional expertise. This is not to undermine the importance of the understanding and knowledge of the functional skills for a senior level candidate. However, that is a given. It's hygiene. What is more important is the ability to conceptualize at the CFO level. At that level, it is a strategic consulting role to advise on initiatives affecting global positioning, depending on the context, of course, tactical actions and resource allocations for long-term initiatives. It can be especially related that consulting role, especially related to the mergers and acquisition activity. wherever that is the case in point. It could be related to the capital structure, how much debt equity ratio, what should be the debt equity ratio for a certain enterprise at a certain evolutionary stage and in a certain ecosystem. The contribution towards strategic planning is of course very important so that the financial strategy which aligns with the business objectives. Apart from this, of course, at the senior levels and mid levels also, an understanding of the valuations methods, or the NPV, and of course there are various methods, and the financial professional should be well versed with that in case the company is not merely looking at the business model where revenue is high and the costs are low and there is enough cash. If it is a company is in a growth phase, for example, it is so true today for the e-commerce companies. Their valuation becomes very important where there is fundraising, which is important. So, of course, the finance professional should be at the junior level and mid-level be the doer, and at the senior level, from a strategic standpoint, because it should be able to understand the budgeting, merger and acquisition transactions, the discounted cash flow method, and not only that, it should also be able to understand the latest market trends, not just domestic markets, but international markets, wherever that impacts, and in most of the cases, it does. The senior finance professional, of course, is also expected to understand the Brent crude oil pricing, how it is falling, the general environmental factors, how the Greek government debt crisis is impacting the different countries, and also things like Fed rate and LIBOR rate, which are standard parameters and indices which affect the global economy in all the countries, far and wide. The positive and negative effects of amendments in the financial budget, not only in the company, but the country's finance budget. I mean, that's, of course, without saying. So all these factors are important, and they vary from levels to levels. So with this, I'll move on to the next slide. The measuring the fitment of the skill with the job requirement. Of course, the job description has to be made in consultation with the hiring manager, and a lot of discussion should happen there, and it should go to the NS detail so that the fitment is gauged properly and correctly. There are many methods. There can be a job description wherever different companies deploy methods like a job evaluation. There is a job evaluation score in the job description itself, or there could be more of the job evaluation objective parameters like the budgets or the revenue or the span of control, or even subjective parameters written down in detail depending on the position, of course. There could be psychometric tests. There could be other tests at junior levels, for example, like reading. One could, engage with junior level finance professionals, especially accounting professionals, for the ability to read and interpret the P&L or the balance sheet. Because in an interview, it is a bit subjective, and when you're trying to find out the real skill, especially at the junior levels, it might be important in many contexts to ensure that you are having a discussion with some tests. Now, before we move on to finance, I think we have 2 more slides, and we'll talk about discovery and sourcing. Now, social media, of course, is gradually acquiring primacy in this domain. LinkedIn especially is extremely important. People also looking at the YouTube, where the video series are there. And I mean, this is something which you can read, and it varies, of course. Headhunting and executive search is hugely limited to these senior level positions. And there are other channels, of course, which have been talked about. At senior levels, of course, referrals from the industry, not the employee referrals, are extremely important. People even now go to the Facebook and other portals to ensure that. The point I'm trying to make is that Facebook has not remained a personal site only. It's also linked to the many recruiters read it as well. With this, we will move on to, I think, the hiring of the niche skills, the finance professionals. I did talk about it while talking about the different levels, but we'll be more specific to this now. First and foremost, any finance professional, what the recruiter should look for is he or she must have a sound business acumen, a general business understanding, functional expertise, of course, and high proficiency level there, and outstanding soft skills. Of course, the degree can vary depending on levels and the roles. Some of the people might be required to do an individual contributor role. Out there, the interpersonal skills will not be that important as it would be for a finance professional who is going and engaging with the stakeholders or with the prospective investors. Expertise with strategic data analysis and regulatory issues is extremely important. So these are some very broad qualities to look for in a finance professional. Out here, I would stop short. A finance professional at the CFO level or the financial controller or even the next level, ideally, is not an analyst. She or he is not only providing you with insights, but also foresight. That is the difference. That is what would differentiate a strategic mindset of the candidate. So that is that ability for senior level and mid-level candidates to be able to gauge is very important. Out here in this slide, I have listed some of the technical or say functional and behavioral requirements for the senior level hiring. I have covered some of this except law. I did cover compliance. Functioning of the board, yes, that's extremely important. This is the fresh point here, which I have not covered previously. And I'm sure while I speak here, let me again go back to my initial statement. Most humbly, I mentioned that, and I'll reiterate it, that I am sharing my thoughts and point of view. I'm sure all of you on this call, so it's an opportunity for me to connect with you. And I just hope, unfortunately, there's no real-time interaction, but I'll be taking the questions. So it should not sound didactic. I know all of you are doing this day in and day out. And definitely, I would seek your inputs on this call as well as later on as well. So, which would also, continue my learning. It's a continuous process. So going back to the slide, the understanding of the function of the board is extremely important for not only the company secretary, but also for the finance professionals, CFO, and maybe 2 levels below. I would say even the junior level or mid-level finance and professional. Actually, there is nobody junior today. Those are the guys who are doing everything with the seniors are just front-ending with the board members or with the different other stakeholders. So they must have, across levels, I would say, an understanding of the expectations of the investors, not only in the sense of the format of the reports, but maybe sometimes the flavor differs from an investor to the other. Many of you would have experienced that. Equipping the CEO in decision-making, of course, is something extremely important for the finance function, which is spearheaded by the CFO. Among the behavioral attributes, what is most important is, of course, the ability to have poise. The sales guys and the marketing guys. Of course, I'm saying, not mentioning that it's a general leadership ability to have poise. But it is more important for the finance professional. Even if the sales guy has some jitters, the marketing professional has become worked up. Sometimes the CEO also, if he is or she is impatient, it is the CFO who is expected to maintain that poise and the balance of mind in all situations, because it is the finance function which is obviously the custodian of the coffers of the company. And they have to be very mature. They are like looking after others in that sense, ensuring their well-being. So that's something extremely important. They must be able, very responsible to, of course, organization status in the sense of whatever is changing, if there's an organization change, if there's a business vertical change. The CFO is logically the successor to the CEO. The others of course, our successor is the Chief Marketing Officer. When I say CMO, obviously I'm assuming that those companies where the CMO heads the sales as well as the marketing function. And this becomes very important in case of crisis, where you see today, unfortunately, because of sometimes not proper business continuity planning, or in case of a certain demise or unfortunate illness happening to CFOs, we are seeing this very important. That is the time when the CFO actually is expected to stand up and hold the mantle, to hold forth for the company. So these are some of the behavioral attributes which are extremely important. And ethics and integrity is something which forms the basic DNA of a finance professional. Compliance is implied there. The next slide, it talks about some general tools and techniques. What is done, if you can just read it. I'll take a minute's break and have a gulp of water. So as I mentioned here, for the junior level especially, there are various assessment tests. The questionnaire method is used there. And there are business skill tests like the Excel test or the advanced Excel test. I've seen so many professionals who come and they are extremely good in Excel, but they don't know macros sometimes, whereas we would have assumed that they would know it. So there are so many other aspects to business skills, be it even a presentation skill, or Excel sheet, reporting. I think it is extremely important for especially the beginners and even the executive or senior executive level. I mean, of course, different organizations have different hierarchies. But at this level, it is important that a test is administered by way of a financial report to the candidate by the recruiter to study it and to interpret it. Of course, the answer, the recruiter needs to educate herself first to be able to ensure that the right answer is there and to be even relate to the candidate. Job description is something important, and if evaluation is done by the company, most of us do it now, it's a great aid. But the job description is something which the recruiter must go word by word and ensure that the candidate's skills and behavioral attributes are in tandem with the thing. We move on to the next slide, wherein not the functional skills, but there is some measurement of the behavioral skills or attributes. So I would request you to just go through this. So we can use a psychometric test like disc profiling or 16PF test, which does give some inputs about the candidate. Yeah, so disc profiling and 16PF tests, and there are so many other, of course, psychometric tests, with B or any other test. And there could be a STAR technique or a reference check. Reference check is something, of course. So first, let me talk about the psychometric test. One thing which must be guarded is that the recruiter who is administering the psychometric test must be proficient and must be trained and certified in the usage, not only of the test, I mean even the finding the report through the software or in the end of the way which is there. The second thing which is extremely important is that the interviewer, be it the recruiter or the functional interviewer, which is the manager of finance or the senior level finance professional who is interviewing, must not go blindly by the findings of the psychometric report. Because all psychometric reports have no right or wrong answers. They are just attempting to study the mind of the person, and every individual is unique. That's the basic premise of behavioral science, and we must always keep that in mind. So the psychometric test findings have to be looked at only from two standpoints. One, whether they have a fitment with the role which is required. If a role requires a high level of meticulousness, whether it is there, or if a role requires a high level of influencing, whether that is there, and both are different, of course. So, especially for finance professionals, I think the eye for detail, precision, that is extremely important. And the interviewer should also ensure that psychometric test is only one aspect of the findings and not taken as in totality. Reference check and background checks are different, and we must ensure that we go by that. Background check, I would usually and typically in most of the companies, how it is used is for finding out the educational background and past 2 companies' experience. That's a standard form which is used by most of the companies. Of course, there are many others which go in further detail. So in background check, the agency, the third-party agency, which is conducting the background check, usually connects with the institutes or the university to ensure that the degree is correct and the enrollment number and other details are matching. Whereas in the residence address proof and other tests, they ensure that this is happening. Now, so this is what. Whereas reference check is something different. It is more to do with connecting with previous employers or the HR professionals or the finance professionals or the supervisors in the previous companies and trying to find out about the candidate. We must keep in mind that this is a double-edged sword, because this could be sometimes, unfortunately, because human beings are what they are, sometimes, of course, I'm saying in some cases, be marred by the relationship of the candidate with the person you are checking the reference with. So we must talk to the way to negate this or eliminate this bias in the reference check process is to talk to multiple people to come to arrive at an understanding. Secondly, the discussion must happen in a structured manner, whereas different form points should have been enumerated basis the job description about the candidate, and so that they can be the different reference checks from different individuals about the candidate can be compared on same parameters, and only then one should arrive at that. There are many biases of the people who you are asking about the candidate from also one should try to eliminate, especially in a globalized economy today, and where there is diversity, be it differently able diversity, gender diversity, different ethnic, cultural groups. So one has to be very careful there and ensure that only the information pertaining to the job is what should be considered. So that filtering has to be done by the interviewer, be it the recruiter or the functional interviewer, for example, the finance professional in this case. With this, we move on to the next slide. I would urge you to just read this, because one of the things which is very important is measuring knowledge versus hands-on skills. We have all come across individuals who have brilliant knowledge, academic knowledge, experiential knowledge. However, when it comes to implementing, sometimes they have not been able to, bring it down to from the drawing board to the ground situation in the market or on the reports in this case. So let me try to distinguish between the 2 aspects of intelligence, and we borrow here deeply from psychology. So on the one hand, we have crystallized intelligence. On the other, we have fluid intelligence. Crystallized intelligence is primarily based on what is already crystallized in the mind of the candidate. What she has studied, be it academic knowledge, be it any certifications further, and learning from experience in the previous organizations. Exposure to various situations, various forms. For example, in finance, if someone has worked on SOX compliance for a NASDAQ-listed company, ethics and compliance requires a different level altogether. If someone has worked on IFRS, remember, we had to implement IFRS from April 1, 2011. Because of the various requests from different bodies, industry bodies, as well as the Institute of Chartered Accountants and other agencies, the government has been postponing that. So an employee who's worked on these accounting standards would be pretty much different in approach, in tone and tenor of work compared to the rest of us. So these all exposures to different situations, problem-solving skills, which have been applied in highly complex situations and in different contexts, where there has been scenario building of many types, when has been doing a lot of financial modeling for different investors and changing it over a period of time, the long-term strategic long-range planning, being drilled down to the annual budgets and changing it, the IM investor manual report, the IM reports. So all this, exposure to this and doing. The best way is, of course, apart from academic knowledge, more important is learning by doing, and that's more effective. So all this finally crystallizes in the mind of the doer, and that's why it is crystallized intelligence, and that's the beauty of the human creation. It just resides there, and when the situation comes, it is right there. It gives you the insight. Okay, apply this. Whereas we think we work very hard, especially for students, it actually happens automatically. If you see, most of it resides in the subconscious mind, and does not have to be loud, every time. It's already there. So that is crystallized intelligence. Whereas fluid intelligence is something which is very equally important, sometimes more important actually, which is the hands-on skills, which leads to the hands-on skills or implementation. Fluid intelligence depends on the quick and correct understanding of the situation, grasping of various subtle nuances which are there in the situation, while discussing with an investor, while a discussion of the CFO with the CEO, or various function heads. There are so many said things, there are so many unsaid things. There's so much body language happening, there are so many organizational dynamics happening, there are informal groups, grapevines. So the CFO or the finance professional at any level, usually any which way, is aware of this. So when a certain situation comes, the ability to quickly grasp the situation, assimilate it and internalize it inside, and to come up with quick problem solving initiatives with solutions at mid-level and at higher level strategy. That is what is very important. It's like thinking on one's feet, basically, I would say. I am tempted to also call it being street smart, but since that's a term of disapprobation, I would refrain from it. But it is something akin to that. So that is fluid intelligence. And we all, of course, as I speak, I'm sure all of you would be recollecting your different experiences there. So that is the distinction between crystallized knowledge and fluid intelligence. The ability to work with and through different people in difficult situations, especially the ability to deal with ambiguity, calls for a lot of fluid intelligence. And that's why you would have seen that there are a lot of people who have done very well in some organizations where they had a good senior, but then when they became the head of the department or a head of a vertical at the manager level or a regional head in finance, when they were exposed to the, so to say, vagaries of various or demands of various functions and stakeholders, then they start having jitters and they're not able to do so well. The only reason is the fluid intelligence bit there, where you have to be independent. And that, of course, continues with us. Like learning is continuous, so is intelligence. It grows on and on. I'm not trying to dispute the psychologist's theories on intelligence, of course, but that's my, as I said at the outset, my individual belief. It gets honed like skills, intelligence as well. So fluid intelligence, I would believe, is more important than crystallized intelligence. Then there are, I'll move on to the next slide. Some things which are obvious, so not much mention is required actually. Nevertheless, let's go through this list of benefits of the measurement. Right candidate leads to the right employee, no misconduct, fraud, abuse of confidential information. Mind you, this is more of a HR recruiter's responsibility and less of the functional recruiter, the finance recruiter, I would say. Readily available references, test results, of course. I mean, that saves the panel's time, definitely, so the recruiter has to do that. Attrition, of course, is something very important. You know, at this point of time, as we speak, the employment outlook, which has been for the last, let me say, 7 quarters, is drastically changing, going to change in the next 2 quarters. The employment outlook is going to be very high. So the ultimate test of recruitment is in whether the employee got confirmed, whether the employee was able to earn his or her bonus well, was able to get a good performance rating, was able to get a good increment. These are the final tests of recruitment. So in the organizations that I have worked in the last 6-7 years at least, I would say about 8 years, I have always, with the help of my team, of course, implemented a quality of hire matrix, where the accountabilities have been distinguished. So what the recruiter's responsibilities are and what is the functional interviewers, the finance interviewers' responsibility. If the employee has indulged in some fraud or in misconduct or is very aggressive unduly, that is the accountability in where I have defined that of the HR recruiter. Whereas if the employee has not got confirmed, it is the accountability. Of course, I'm not absolving the recruiter from that because he or she is the initial person who filters that information or engages those abilities and must have that discerning eye. Nevertheless, if an employee and candidate doesn't get confirmed, that is the functional interviewers, the finance interviewers' responsibility. Similarly, the bonus, increment, everything I would say is more tilted towards the finance recruiter. Whereas if this confirmation or attrition within 30 days or 90 days is happening, or 180 days also, till 6 months I would hold the HR recruiter. That's my view, and I've always gone by that. Responsible for attrition till 6 months. Beyond that, it is definitely the boss. So it is the interviewer as well as the supervisor. So it's good to have a quality of hire matrix wherein it is clearly differentiated accountabilities with weighted scores out being there, so that everyone knows what is doing. In many of my previous companies, I've seen that there have been interviewers, not recruiters, functional interviewers, finance managers, for example, or operations managers who have been found in. So we used to keep the records there. One must have those records, and now of course it's all automated, so it's not so difficult to ensure that to be able to discern who are those recruiters, who's hired candidates as in interviewers, whose hired candidates are leaving early or are not performing well. So then an interviewing skills workshop for them, or even if that doesn't work, maybe different interviewers will have to get in place. So these are some of the tangible actions which emerge from studies of attrition, studies of recruitment. Of course, I have not mentioned some standard things like the CV to shortlist ratio, the shortlist to offer ratio, offer to joining ratio, and the CV to joining ratio. So these are some standard things where one must look at the channel mix and evaluate each, be it the referrals, especially when you're working with vendors, the placement consultants, or the executive search firms. It becomes important. With this, I come to the last slide of my presentation. And recruitment, especially in finance, specifically in finance and generally in any other department, is both an art and a science. I would say a science and an art. So whereas you can see Da Vinci on the one hand, on the other by Mona Lisa on the one hand, by Da Vinci, on the other hand, you can find there itself. So it can be an art and a science. So it is a science where we have filtered and whatever I have spoken, and there are many, syllabus in management institutions and trainings which teach recruitment. We have to remember that it's the part which becomes a crystallized intelligence. Ultimately, beyond that, when you're applying it, it becomes an art and depends on every individual recruiter. So with this, I would like to end my presentation and invite for questions.
Thank you so much, Sanjay, for such an insightful session. We have a few questions here with us. So the first question that we have here is, how important is it to have a financial experience before we hire for a finance this thing? So for example, we have the example of the CEO of Credit Suisse who has no experience in finance whatsoever. So how important is it to have a financial experience?
So Purva, what I just mentioned was, my response to this question would be that experiential knowledge is always desirable, highly desirable. Nevertheless, it is not essential to have financial experience for recruiting a finance guy. So when I say recruitment, of course, what is important is if you can have someone as a recruiter who has financial knowledge, it is very good. But it might not always be possible. And I think every recruiter educates herself or himself before doing a certain recruitment. It's not only finance. You see, in that case, all the IT recruitment is done by most of the people. Some people who have IT knowledge and who have been IT or technology developers or database administrators, but there is a large section which is more technical in that sense, I'm saying, which does not have IT recruitment, but they learn with experience the various languages, the various verticals within recruitment. And it is extremely important to, understand the nuances of the subject. That is what finally matters. One need not have experience in that sense.
Absolutely. Thanks,
because it will also be added by the, sorry I'm interrupting you, because usually it is desirable that you will ultimately get a finance professional to do the interview as well, right, later on at the final stage.
All right. Well, we have another question here. So Varsha asks that if you can suggest some new strategies for recruitment, because as nowadays social media is booming. So if you could suggest some new strategies for recruitment.
Thanks for the question. So Varsha, I would mention that sometimes people say that almost everything in this world has been said, so there is nothing new to say. So I think recruiters have been a very smart lot and have by now adopted and used almost all strategies. I can't think of a novel, entirely new strategy. Of course, what I can think of is there are different ways of referrals apart from the portals, and there are so many social media communities and groups which are formed. One very common thing is an ex-employee alumnus which is created nowadays. So at least I have used it and it's been highly successful. So many companies have their ex-employees on their alumni, which has been created like institutes, and good referrals come from there. Not only referrals as in the candidate who are referred, apart from that, even a lot of insights about candidates are there. So I think that is one of the important ways, new ways, relatively new ways in which recruitment has moved on. Secondly, of course, like I have recruited for different departments, different industries, myself as well, like most of you. If you have some your school and college alumni help you a lot there, especially when it comes to global recruitment. A new thing which I had used when I was involved in Africa and in a telecom company. So I was heading HR. Of course, it was not merely recruitment. I was the chief human resource officer for 6 countries, and for that organization. It started with due diligence, and especially the initial stage, it was all about hiring and onboarding. So in a new country, it was very difficult to do that. So we had to go through placement. It depends on the, so whereas I'm not able to give you a new way, but I must say that it depends on the context, what is more. So in that context, dependence on the local consultants was extremely high. Let's take the example of the oil companies. So out there, recruitment partly is done by the operations, the drilling companies, and like Shell, for example, in Dubai or in say Abu Dhabi. Let me take a specific example. So they and maybe in Russia or USA as well. So most of the oil companies have a very close network, and they are they know each other by names, or there is a group which has been interacting. There are virtual networks which are there. So in that is the context which works. So it would depend on the context, and I can think almost everything which I had mentioned is there.
Well, thank you so much, Sanjay. We have another question here. So you had mentioned that eye for detail is very important. So isn't that true for every hire, for every field? So if you could elaborate a little more, why only finance?
Right. So eye for detail is important, as you rightly said, for all departments, but it is relatively more, I would say, important for finance. It deals with numbers and the financial reports, the accuracy there, and the ability to discern trends where it is not obvious is a finance professional's forte. I've seen financial controllers coming up with trends which were not at least obvious to me or the marketing guys so many times. That is with the eye for detail. For example, to give a very quotidian example, a finance professional, unlike the other professionals, starts with looking at the bigger numbers. Doesn't get befuddled or obfuscated by the smaller numbers. So that ability comes from their seasoned eye for detail over a period of time, which becomes a skill. So since the finance professionals deal with numbers, various kinds of data, trends, compliances, so even one small error can be, really damaging for the company. So they have a higher responsibility, and that's why they always have an eye for detail, and it becomes more important.
Great. Well,
One
thanks
error
so
in a
much.
financial, yeah, sure.
Please go ahead.
Well, it's fine. I think I've completed. I was just saying one error by a finance professional can cause the organization a loss of business. That's why eye for detail is more important for the finance guys. And they have to be advisors to the, investor community, to the organization, to the CEO. So eye for detail, actually, the marketing and sales guy is also HR guys. Everybody looks up to the finance professionals for having that capability. Whereas I said different departments have different strengths. Individuals also vary within the department. So, but by and large, so as I said, the recruiters have and the HR professionals have a stronger understanding of behavioral sciences as their practitioners and understanding of the psyche and behavioral attributes. They should have and usually have better insights. Similarly, the eye for detail is better with finance professionals. Not to undermine the fact that others should also have it.
Well, thanks so much, Sanjay. We have another question here. So, Varsha again asks, she's asking how much extent poaching is ethical?
That's a very good question, I think. And so sometimes there are questions which don't have a right or wrong answers. Again, I'll resort, and I keep doing it, to my initial statement. That is my point of view. See, poaching is as damaging as cannibalization, beyond a point. It's like it breeds upon itself, and it is like harming oneself, beyond a point. So you look at different examples. For example, I work with telecom companies, apart from IT companies. Both these industries have had, I am not able to find a word which is to deal with blood, and I can't use the word which is used. So it was a bloodbath. Yeah, I got a word. So it was a bloodbath between Airtel and Vodafone, which was Hutch at some point of time. They had to come to a poaching agreement. Otherwise, they were just not able to go ahead. Despite their rivalry in the market, Hutch would launch at that point of time, Hutch, which is now Vodafone, would launch one scheme. The same 2 hours later, Airtel would launch a better scheme. So that was, especially in the Delhi circle, I recall that kind of a bloodbath which was there. But they had to come to an agreement on poaching, because otherwise the employees kept on moving from the one to the other. The costs went on higher, going. Business continuity got impacted. So poaching, beyond a point, now it's difficult to define a point, of course, but is certainly highly damaging. Obviously, it's less ethical, but more damaging. Ethics is a question which is different, so I'll come back to it. First, the damage which is caused. I still remember Convergys and IBM, which was Daksh then, they had to enter into a no-poach agreement at some point of time. I'm using some examples, companies, but let's say they are generally general companies, let's say. So there comes a time when, beyond a point, if poaching happens, it is impossible to sustain without having a no-poach agreement for especially the affected parties if there are less number of them, despite having a very staunch rivalry in the market. Coming to the ethics part, now that's some line which I would tread very carefully, because now for an employee, there is no loss of ethics if two companies keep on poaching or him. So there's no, it depends how you look at it also. Whereas for the recruiters, yes, I mean, if you start trying to build your company by poaching another company's employees, certainly you don't have the mettle to be there in the market. If you're doing, say, 10%, 20%, some X, that kind of percentage, I would say it's fine. But beyond that, I would feel it is unethical because you are trying to not play by your strength or create your strength, but trying to just easily get. So it's like make or buy. Unfortunately, these are two terms, commercial terms, not desirable to be used for human beings, which are employees in this context. But I must say that it is make or buy. So if you can, Hindustan Unilever is a classic case. It made what which all others bought. Hindustan Unilever always still succeeded. But of course, poaching there was not that all companies started poaching from Hindustan Unilever or all the employees of Hindustan Unilever. So I would say to some extent it's fine, but when it becomes planned, systematic poaching, targeted poaching, in large numbers, it is unethical for recruiters as well.
Thank you so much, Sanjay. We have a couple of more questions here, but since we're short on time, we will take them offline. But thank you so much for such an insightful session. So with this question and answer session, we are going to wrap up today's webinar. Once again, we would like to thank our webinar partner for today, Metal, which is a talent management expert. Finally, a special thanks to Sanjay, the speaker for this webinar, for his time and invaluable information that he has shared with us today. And I would like to thank everybody in the webinar audience for participating in today's presentation. We will come back to you with many more. That concludes today's webcast. Thank you and have a great day.
Thank you, Purva. And thanks to everyone on the webinar.